There is something timeless in the way the Sahaba lived their lives. They were not angels, nor were they perfect, but their hearts were deeply anchored in faith, their actions marked by sincerity, and their choices often guided by a wisdom far beyond their years. Each one walked a unique path beside the Prophet Muhammad, learning directly from his words, watching his example, and rising to meet the trials that defined their generation. Their stories are not distant relics of a forgotten past, but living lessons for those who seek meaning and purpose today. These 100 moments from their lives are not just reminders of courage, patience, or loyalty. They are invitations to reflect, to reimagine how we love, how we forgive, how we hold on to truth, and how we stand when the world pushes against us. There is beauty in their struggles and brilliance in their quiet victories. 1. Abu Bakr stayed beside the Prophet when no one else dared to. In the stillness of the night during the Hijrah, danger pressed from every direction, yet Abu Bakr's heart did not flinch. He walked behind the Prophet, then beside him, then ahead, constantly shielding him without a word. His love was quiet but resolute, rooted in conviction rather than impulse. When they hid in the cave, he worried not for himself but for the man beside him, his heart aching with concern. Loyalty like his was not loud or boastful. It whispered through actions, through presence, through the kind of trust that knows no conditions and asks for nothing in return. 2. Umar held himself accountable before judging others. Before speaking of someone's fault, Umar would ask himself if he carried that same flaw. His sense of justice began with his own soul. He feared hypocrisy more than any enemy and walked through the streets of Medina not as a ruler above others, but as a servant of truth. One night, he heard a woman weeping from hunger and carried the grain himself. Not once did he seek applause. To him, leadership meant responsibility, not power. His eyes searched for fairness in the smallest details, and his hands were always ready to correct his own errors before pointing at another's. 3. Uthman gave quietly and gave again when no one else would. When the Muslims needed a well, Uthman bought it and gave its water freely. When the army needed provisions, he filled their hands without waiting to be asked. His wealth was vast, but his heart was far richer. He wore humility like a garment, so his generosity never sought attention. Even in the privacy of night, he would give what others clung to. What made his charity beautiful was not the amount, but the sincerity that poured from it. His example teaches that true giving is not measured in gold, but in the quiet intention that asks for nothing back. 4. Ali stood firm when others wavered. At Khaybar, when the fortress gates loomed and others faltered, Ali stepped forward. His body was wounded and weary, but his spirit stood tall. He did not rush for glory, but for duty. Holding the banner was not about pride, but about carrying the hopes of his people. He moved with calm certainty, speaking with reverence, not boast. His strength was not only in his arm, but in his devotion, in the way he trusted Allah's help before the first step was taken. Courage for Ali was not loud or reckless. It was still, steady, and always anchored in faith. 5. Bilal chose truth even while chained. Under the burning sun, with rocks crushing his chest and whips scarring his skin, Bilal's lips kept returning to one word: Ahad. 1. The unity of God was all he would say, and it was all that mattered. They tried to break his body, but his spirit held firm. He had once been a slave, voiceless and unseen, yet Islam gave him dignity that no master could take. His defiance was not rooted in anger, but in certainty. His voice rose not in rebellion, but in remembrance. Every blow only carved his place deeper in the foundation of this faith. 6. Khadijah believed in the Prophet before anyone else did. When the Prophet trembled after the first revelation, unsure of what had come upon him, Khadijah held him close and spoke words no one else had the heart or insight to say. She reminded him of his honesty, his kindness, his service to the weak. She did not ask for proof. She trusted his truth because she knew his character. Her faith was calm, unshaken, and nurturing. She gave him peace when the world brought fear. In her arms, revelation found its first believer. In her heart, the message found its first home. Her love was the first confirmation. 7. Salman searched the world for truth and never gave up. Born into a house of fire worship, Salman's soul ached for something more. He traveled far, across empires, following traces of sincerity. He served priests, crossed deserts, endured betrayal, and finally reached the Prophet in Medina. His journey was not fueled by rebellion, but longing. He believed that truth was worth every hardship, every loss. When he finally found it, he wept not from relief alone, but from recognition. His life reminds us that faith is not always inherited. Sometimes it is searched for, stumbled toward, fought for, and when it is found, it settles in the heart like light. 8. Abu Hurairah preserved what others forgot. He spent his days in the mosque, listening, learning, memorizing. He had no wealth and little food, but his hunger was for knowledge. While others returned to their homes and trade, Abu Hurairah stayed near the Prophet, capturing his words in the treasure chest of memory. He did not hoard them. He shared them with generations to come. When people asked how he remembered so much, he smiled and said, "Because I made myself available." He teaches us that knowledge is not only for the elite. It is for the sincere, the patient, the ones willing to sit and absorb. 9. Mus'ab gave up everything for faith. Once draped in silks, perfumed and adored, Mus'ab walked the streets of Mecca as its golden boy. But when he embraced Islam, he walked away from it all. His mother disowned him. His wealth vanished. Yet he stood in Medina years later, leading prayer and teaching the Quran with patched clothes and a luminous heart. His dignity did not come from luxury, but from conviction. He did not regret the cost. He counted it an honor. His story shows that true richness is not in what you wear or own, but in the values that guide your every step. 10. Sumayya stood tall even when struck down. They threatened her. They beat her. But Sumayya's gaze never lowered. Her lips did not tremble. She was a woman, aged and unarmed, yet her courage was stronger than the swords that pierced her. She chose to die with faith rather than live with falsehood. The first martyr in Islam was not a warrior on the battlefield, but a mother in the streets, unmoved by fear. Her legacy is not in the blood that was shed, but in the truth she refused to surrender. Her death was not a defeat. It was the first seed of sacrifice that would bloom forever. 11. Sa'd ibn Abi Waqqas believed his dua would be answered, and it was. Sa'd did not speak of his nearness to the Prophet as a boast, but carried it in the quiet power of his prayers. He was known as someone whose dua reached the heavens, not because of eloquence, but because of purity. Once, when slander was cast against him, he simply turned to Allah. No shouting, no defense, just prayer. And his prayer was answered. His trust was complete, unshaken by circumstance. He believed that when the heart is clean and the tongue sincere, the barrier between earth and sky vanishes. His life is proof that dua is never wasted. 12. Zayd ibn Haritha chose love over lineage. Born into nobility, kidnapped into slavery, and eventually freed, Zayd was given a choice to return to his birth family. But he chose to stay with the Prophet, not out of obligation, but from love. He said he had never known a man more just, more kind. His decision stunned the Arab world, where lineage was everything. Yet Zayd showed that the bonds of faith, mercy, and companionship are stronger than blood alone. His choice redefined honor. He taught that true belonging is not about heritage, but about who sees your worth and treats you with dignity and love. 13. Ammar ibn Yasir bore pain with a heart full of light. The fires of persecution consumed his family, and his heart was torn between faith and survival. When the torture became unbearable, words slipped from his lips to escape death, but his heart never wavered. He ran to the Prophet, ashamed and shaken. The Prophet comforted him, saying, "If your heart is firm, you are still among the faithful." Ammar showed that moments of weakness do not erase a lifetime of strength. His suffering was not a sign of failure, but of deep endurance. He carried the wounds of belief in silence, yet his name became a banner of steadfastness. 14. Asma bint Abu Bakr risked her life for a loaf of bread. She climbed mountains with food hidden in the folds of her clothes, her waist belt torn to tie provisions. Asma was young, pregnant, and alone, yet her steps never faltered. Her father and the prophet were hiding in the cave, and she delivered to them what they needed without hesitation. When a cruel hand struck her face, she did not cry. Her strength was not loud or recognized in the moment, but it shaped history. Her courage was the kind that moves quietly, but leaves deep imprints. She reminds us that sometimes, love for truth is proven in small, daring acts. 15. Ja'far ibn Abi Talib spoke with grace that silenced kings. When the Muslims fled to Abyssinia, Ja'far stood before the Negus and spoke with a voice that carried truth and peace. He described their transformation through the Prophet's teachings, not with argument but with sincerity. He quoted the Quran, and the king's heart trembled. Ja'far did not plead, he simply reflected light. His words were not rehearsed, but lived. He showed that sometimes, dawah is not in debate, but in calm testimony. In that distant court, far from Medina or Makkah, his dignity carried the entire Ummah. He proved that truth, when spoken gently and clearly, needs no defense. 16. Abdullah ibn Mas'ud loved the Quran like his own breath. Small in frame but mighty in spirit, Abdullah stood beneath the Kaaba and recited the Quran aloud while enemies watched. They beat him, but he returned the next day to recite again. He was not seeking defiance. He simply could not contain the love he had for Allah's words. His life revolved around the Quran, not just in memorization, but in embodiment. Every verse changed how he walked, how he judged, how he breathed. His presence reminded people that the book is not only for scholars or reciters, it is for the sincere, for the ones whose hearts are tuned to revelation. 17. Abdullah ibn Abbas sought knowledge like a man chasing treasure. Still a boy when the Prophet passed away, Abdullah did not waste his youth. He knocked on doors, waited in dust, and humbled himself before older companions to learn. He would sleep on doorsteps just to catch a hadith. His thirst for knowledge was not satisfied with easy answers. He asked why, how, when. He listened with his full heart and memorized with deep care. His curiosity was not restless, but reverent. Over time, people came to him for insight, and he became the sea of knowledge. His life shows that wisdom does not come with age, but with relentless devotion. 18. Hudhaifa ibn al-Yaman guarded secrets and never betrayed trust. He was entrusted with the names of the hypocrites, a list given to no one else. He carried it without pride, without leakage. Even when others begged to know, he kept his lips sealed. His loyalty to the Prophet's trust was absolute. When Umar asked if his name was on that list, Hudhaifa did not reveal it. His silence spoke volumes. In an age where secrets slip through casual talk, Hudhaifa teaches us the sacredness of trust. He did not seek glory. He held a burden few could bear, and he carried it with grace and fear of breaking it. 19. Abu Darda lived simply so his soul could breathe. He was offered wealth, honor, and ease, but Abu Darda chose a home of clay and a heart uncluttered. He once said that too much attachment to this world hardens the heart. He would rise in the night to pray and speak to his Lord as if whispering to a dear friend. He gave counsel with gentleness and corrected with compassion. His focus was not on appearance but on the state of the soul. His eyes saw what others missed because they were not clouded by greed or pride. He reminds us that simplicity is not lack, but clarity. 20. Abu Dar spoke the truth even when it cost him. He stood before power and said what others were afraid to utter. He criticized injustice not with rage but with firmness. When wealth pooled into the hands of a few, he reminded them of the Prophet's warnings. He chose to live far from cities, in solitude, not out of bitterness, but to protect his soul. He did not fear isolation, because his heart was never alone. He knew that truth often walks without companions. His words were sharp, but his heart was sincere. Abu Dar teaches us that speaking truth is not about volume, but about unwavering conscience. 21. Hassan ibn Ali made peace when war could have torn the Ummah apart. When tension mounted and swords nearly clashed, Hassan stepped back from battle and chose unity. He had the strength to fight, the lineage to lead, but his heart was tuned to something higher. He saw that sometimes true courage lies not in conquering an enemy, but in preventing bloodshed between brothers. His decision was not weakness, it was wisdom wrapped in restraint. He gave up power not for comfort, but for the sake of the community. In doing so, he preserved the fragile bond of faith among Muslims. His silence became louder than any battlefield victory. 22. Hanzala walked to battle straight from his wedding night. He had just been married, the scent of celebration still in the air. When the call to defend the Prophet came, he did not hesitate, did not ask for delay. He went to Uhud with his heart still wrapped in joy, and met death with unwavering purpose. Angels washed his body, and the Prophet called him the one bathed by the heavens. His story is not about recklessness. It is about priorities etched in faith. He chose duty to his Lord over personal comfort. In him we see that the greatest love stories sometimes end in sacrifice for something eternal. 23. Salama gave her opinion and shaped history. After the Treaty of Hudaybiyah, the companions were disheartened and hesitant to obey the Prophet's instruction. He returned to his tent in silence. Salama saw his sadness and offered quiet, profound advice. She told him to lead by action, and when he did, the companions followed. Her insight shifted the moment. She did not shout to be heard. Her wisdom was gentle, private, and effective. She teaches us that influence is not always public. It often moves in whispers behind closed tents, spoken with love and clarity. Her voice was not loud, but it echoed through time. 24. Thabit ibn Qais feared his voice would ruin him. When the verse was revealed cautioning believers not to raise their voices above the Prophet's, Thabit thought he was condemned. His voice had always been loud, his manner naturally strong. He sat in grief, believing he was among the doomed, but the Prophet reassured him that he was a man of paradise. Thabit's fear came from a heart that took guidance seriously. He did not twist the verse to suit his comfort. He held it close, even when it cut deep. His sincerity shows that true faith is not being without flaws, but being deeply sensitive to the voice of truth. 25. Umara shielded the Prophet with her own body. In the chaos of Uhud, when warriors fell and confusion reigned, she stood firm, sword in hand, wounds upon her body. She fought with a mother's resolve and a believer's love. She did not retreat. When others turned back, she stepped forward. The Prophet looked upon her and said, wherever he turned, she was there. Her bravery was not performative. It was born from devotion that made pain irrelevant. She reminds us that strength is not bound to gender or expectation. It rises in the heart of anyone who places truth above self. She bled not for glory, but for faith. 26. Suhaib gave away everything just to follow the Prophet. As he tried to leave Makkah, the Quraysh stopped him. He had come as a slave, worked hard, and earned wealth. Now they demanded it all if he wanted to emigrate. Suhaib did not argue. He left it behind without a second glance. When the Prophet saw him in Medina, he smiled and said, "Your trade has been successful." Suhaib's wealth was not in coins, but in the freedom of his heart. He did not see sacrifice as loss. He saw it as an exchange. What he gave up, he gained 1,000-fold in closeness to his Lord and his messenger. 27. Khalid ibn al-Walid accepted Islam after fighting against it. He had led armies that stood against the Prophet. He had wounded the believers and carved fear into their hearts. Yet when the truth settled in his soul, he did not delay. He came to Medina, bowed his pride, and embraced Islam. The Prophet welcomed him without hesitation. From then on, Khalid fought with unmatched courage, not for ego, but for truth. His past did not define his future. His repentance was not a whispered regret, but a transformation. He teaches that no matter how far someone may have gone, the door remains open. And when they enter, they can shine. 28. Aisha preserved the Prophet's words with unmatched clarity. She was young, sharp, and observant. After the Prophet's passing, companions would come to her for answers. She remembered not just his words, but the expressions, the pauses, the meanings behind each moment. Her mind was a treasury of wisdom. She spoke with confidence, corrected errors, and taught both men and women. Her role was not ornamental, it was essential. Through her, generations learned how the prophet laughed, prayed, forgave, and led. Her brilliance was not in her age, but in her dedication. She reminds us that faith is not only felt, it must be preserved, understood, and carried forward with care. 29. Abu Bakr stood against a friend for the sake of justice. When a man close to him stood accused in court, Abu Bakr did not twist his testimony. He knew the weight of his words and still chose to speak truthfully. His decision cost him a relationship, but it safeguarded his conscience. He was asked how he could testify against someone he knew well. He replied that he loved truth more than comfort. In a world where loyalty often means silence, Abu Bakr teaches us that true loyalty is to justice, even when it costs. His stand was quiet, firm, and without vengeance. It was simply the right thing to do. 30. Julaybib was embraced by the Prophet when society had cast him aside. He was small, unremarkable in appearance, and overlooked. People did not seek his company or see value in him, but the Prophet did. He matched Julaybib with a noble woman, not as a favor, but as a recognition of his worth. When Julaybib fell in battle, alone and brave, the Prophet searched for him. He found his body and said, "He is from me, and I am from him." No title, no wealth, just sincerity and courage. Julaybib teaches us that honor is not in how others see you, but in how your heart meets your Lord. 31. Abdurrahman ibn Auf gave without counting and lived with deep gratitude. He was among the wealthiest of the companions, yet wealth never owned him. When he arrived in Medina with nothing, he asked only to be shown the marketplace. From that moment, he built a fortune, not to store it, but to spread it. He would give caravans away in charity, feed the poor, support armies, and still lower his head in humility. When reminded of his abundance, he would weep, remembering those who had less but were promised more in the hereafter. He teaches us that gratitude is not shown in words alone, but in how generously we give from what we love. 32. Zainab bint Ali stood before tyranny and never trembled. After the tragedy of Karbala, when her family was slain and the women taken captive, Zainab was brought before the ruler who thought she would cower. Instead, she stood with her back straight and her words sharper than any blade. She did not plead for mercy or hide her grief. She spoke of honor, faith, and divine justice with unwavering strength. Her voice echoed through halls of arrogance, unshaken by chains or cruelty. She carried the pain of her family and still refused to surrender dignity. In her, we see that true strength often wears the face of a grieving woman who refuses to be silenced. 33. Miqdad ibn al-Aswad stood alone when others hesitated. When the Prophet consulted his companions before battle, Miqdad rose without waiting for others. He said, "We will not say what Bani Israel said to Musa. We will say, 'Go, and we will come with you.'" His words were like water in a parched moment, steadying the Prophet's heart. He did not wait to see how others would respond. His loyalty was immediate and full. He teaches us that true companionship is not about timing or numbers. It is about being the one who speaks up first when the truth needs a voice and a leader needs a friend. 34. Fatima grieved quietly and lived simply beside greatness. She was the daughter of the Prophet, yet her home was one of hardship and simplicity. She ground grain until her hands cracked, carried water until her shoulders ached, and still greeted the world with softness. When the Prophet passed away, her grief was deep and private. She did not seek the world's attention, though she had every right to speak loudly. Her nobility was not in status, but in how she bore pain with patience. She reminds us that true greatness does not demand recognition. It blooms in the quiet corners of life, where duty and devotion meet. 35. Ubay ibn Ka'b wept when the Prophet named him. One day, the Prophet told him, "Allah commanded me to recite Quran to you." Ubay, overwhelmed, asked through tears, "Did Allah mention me by name?" His love for the Quran was matched only by his humility. He had memorized so much, taught others, and recited with beauty, yet the recognition stunned him. He did not let knowledge breed arrogance. Instead, it made him more tender, more in awe of the one who sent it. He teaches us that honor is not claimed. It is gifted by the Most High and received with trembling hearts that remember who it truly belongs to. 36. Sa'id ibn Amir turned down wealth to protect his soul. Appointed as a governor, Sa'id lived like the poorest of his people. When Umar sent him money to ease his life, he distributed it among the needy without keeping a coin. He did not seek leadership, nor did he enjoy its privileges. His clothes were worn, his meals plain, his home bare. He feared the day he would be asked how he used power. When people questioned his choices, he answered with his actions. He reminds us that leadership is not a throne but a trust. The best among us do not rise to be seen. They rise to serve. 37. Khabbab ibn al-Arat forgave those who left scars on his body. He was tortured until his back became a canvas of burn marks, hot stones placed beneath him until his flesh melted into them. Yet when Islam prevailed and he held influence, Khabbab did not seek revenge. His heart had already placed his pain in the hands of Allah. He lived quietly, preferring the company of remembrance over the noise of anger. His scars were not just signs of suffering. They were marks of steadfastness. He teaches us that forgiveness does not always mean forgetting, but releasing the burden of revenge and allowing the soul to rise above what once broke it. 38. Asim ibn Thabit died protecting the Quran from corruption. When he was ambushed and surrounded, offered safety in exchange for surrender, Asim refused. He knew they wanted his body to humiliate and his mouth to silence. He fought until the end. His final breaths poured in defense of the truth. When they came to mutilate him, a swarm of bees protected his body, denying them their cruelty. Asim's story is not just of courage but of reverence. He gave his life so that the message would not be used by those who hated it. He reminds us that truth is not only to be spoken, it is to be guarded, even in death. 39. Rabi'a ibn Ka'b chose nearness to the Prophet over every luxury. He served the Prophet by day and slept outside his door by night. When the Prophet asked what he wished for, Rabi'a said, "I want to be with you in paradise. Not wealth, not long life, just nearness to the one who showed him the light." The Prophet told him to help himself reach that goal by increasing his sujood. Rabi'a's heart did not wander after status or praise. He simply wanted to remain close. He reminds us that the highest aspirations are not always loud. Sometimes, they are whispered prayers that come from love, too deep for words. 40. Waraka was called a living martyr by the Prophet. She memorized the Quran, led prayers in her home, and longed for the honor of martyrdom. Though the Prophet did not permit her to go to battle, he promised her she would be counted among the martyrs. Later betrayed and killed in her sleep, her life ended not on a battlefield, but in the quiet of her home. Yet the angels greeted her all the same. Her intention carried her farther than many actions. She reminds us that Allah sees not just the limbs, but the heart behind them. The sincerity of a desire can sometimes bear the reward of its fulfillment. 41. Tamim al-Dari brought light to the mosque when others didn't think to. He saw the mosque dark after sunset and brought oil lamps to brighten it. It was a simple gesture, uncommanded and unannounced, but it filled the Prophet with joy. Light poured not only from the flame but from the thought behind it. Tamim noticed what others overlooked and acted without waiting for permission. His contribution was not grand in scale, but rich in sincerity. Sometimes, faith is not just about prayer or sacrifice. It's about small acts that make spaces warmer, people more comfortable, and hearts feel seen. His lamp still flickers in the legacy of mindful service. 42. Barakah, known as Ayman, was loved like a mother. She had been with the Prophet since his childhood, caring for him when he had no one. After his mother passed, she remained loyal and protective. The Prophet later said she was his mother after his mother. She never sought title or attention, only the quiet privilege of being near him. When he passed away, she wept not from disbelief, but because revelation had stopped. Her love was rooted in something deeper than blood. She teaches us that motherhood can come from presence, devotion, and sacrifice, and that to be loved by the best of creation is the highest of honors. 43. Washi turned regret into redemption. He had thrown the spear that killed Hamza, the beloved uncle of the Prophet. For years, he lived with that weight. But when he entered Islam, he did not hide his past. He brought it forward, owned it, and sought to cleanse it. When he later killed Musaylama the liar, he said it was to balance what his hand had once done. His journey was one of pain, honesty, and slow healing. He reminds us that redemption is not a moment. It is a path walked with humility. And no sin, no matter how heavy, is too great for sincere return. 44. Sulaim gave her son's soul back to Allah with grace. Her child passed away while his father was away. She bathed the boy, wrapped him, and welcomed her husband with calm and care. Only after he had rested did she gently tell him that their son had returned to his Lord. Her composure stunned even the Prophet. She did not suppress her grief, but wrapped it in trust. Her strength was not in denying pain, but in walking through it with tawakkul. She reminds us that faith doesn't shield us from loss. It helps us carry it with dignity, whispering Alhamdulillah even when the heart is breaking. 45. Hudhaifa ibn al-Yaman knew the signs of the end, yet lived with serenity. He was entrusted with knowledge of coming trials, told secrets by the Prophet that others weren't given, yet he did not become paranoid or paralyzed. He lived with clarity, focusing on his responsibilities and guarding his heart. He did not use what he knew to judge others or elevate himself. Instead, he prepared, quietly, and kept his character rooted. He teaches us that knowledge should humble us, not harden us, and that being aware of darkness does not mean we stop seeking light. Sometimes knowing what's ahead makes us more gentle, not more afraid. 46. Salman al-Farsi chose labor over status. When they were building the trench to defend Medina, Salman did not supervise from a distance. He dug alongside the rest, mud on his clothes, sweat on his brow. The companion said, "Salman is from us," and the Prophet answered, "From us, the people of my house." His worth was not in where he came from, but in where his heart stood. Though Persian by origin, he belonged fully to a brotherhood that transcended language and land. He reminds us that in Islam, identity is forged not by birth, but by action. He became family through effort, faith, and presence. 47. Haritha longed for paradise and was told he had reached it. One morning, his mother asked where he had gone so early. Then she learned he had been martyred in battle. She approached the Prophet, her voice trembling, asking whether her son was in paradise. The Prophet said, "If you are asking where he is in the highest gardens." Her tears turned to peace. Haritha had once said he saw paradise as if it were before his eyes. He lived with that vision so clearly that he stepped into it without hesitation. He teaches us that when the hereafter becomes real to the heart, the world loses its grip. 48. Khawla bint Thalabah spoke her pain and was heard by heaven. Her husband had pronounced words of ignorance, casting her away while still expecting her service. She refused to accept it and went to the Prophet. He listened, but before he could answer, revelation came. Allah said he had heard the woman who argued with you. A verse descended in her honor. Her voice rose from her home and reached the throne of mercy. She was not a queen or scholar, just a woman who knew her worth. She teaches us that no plea is too small to be heard, and sometimes the most powerful change begins with a woman who refuses silence. 49. Abdullah ibn Umar followed the Prophet's footsteps exactly. After the Prophet passed, Ibn Umar would visit the places he had prayed, rest where he had rested, and avoid where he had avoided. People asked why, and he said, perhaps an angel might have stood there. His devotion was precise, not out of obsession but out of deep love. He did not seek to imitate for display, but to remember, preserve, and honor. Every step was worship, every habit a bridge to memory. He reminds us that love can live in details, and that reverence does not fade when the person is gone. It lives in how we follow. 50. Thumama ibn Uthal forgave the ones who once bound him. Captured by the Muslims and tied to a post in the mosque, Thumama listened silently. After being freed, he left, bathed, and returned to declare his faith. He said, "No face on earth was more hated to me than yours, but now it is the most beloved." He returned not as a prisoner, but as a guest. When his tribe withheld food from Makkah at his command, the Prophet asked him to lift the embargo, and he did. His heart had transformed. He held no grudge. He teaches us that sometimes the best dawah is in character, and that true strength lies in grace. 51. Abu Talha gave away the garden he loved most. He owned a beautiful orchard with a well that the Prophet himself would drink from. When the verse was revealed about not attaining righteousness until you give of what you love, Abu Talha didn't hesitate. He stood before the Prophet and offered that garden as charity. His heart was not torn. He smiled as he let it go, choosing the reward of Allah over the comfort of shade and water. His generosity was not a performance. It came from sincerity that knew the real treasure lies beyond this life. He reminds us that sacrifice only feels heavy when love is misplaced. 52. Asma bint Yazid spoke up in front of the Prophet with confidence and grace. She approached him on behalf of the women, asking why men seem to have more opportunities for good deeds. The Prophet listened and praised her for her courage and clarity. He reassured her that women's efforts are no less when rooted in sincerity. Asma's question was not a challenge, but a sincere desire for understanding and nearness to Allah. Her presence showed that faith does not silence a woman's voice. It honors it when used with wisdom and humility. She reminds us that asking questions in search of truth is not a sign of doubt. It is a sign of depth. 53. Anas ibn Malik served the Prophet for 10 years and never heard a harsh word. From the age of 10, Anas was at the Prophet's side pouring water, carrying sandals, answering calls. In those 10 years, he never once heard the Prophet say, "Why did you do that?" or "Why didn't you?" He witnessed not just miracles, but mannerisms. The Prophet's gentleness left a mark deeper than any lesson. Anas carried it through his life and shared it with generations to come. He reminds us that greatness is not only found in moments of grandeur, but in how we treat the people around us. Patience, kindness, and care leave a legacy more lasting than gold. 54. Uqba ibn Amir turned his time with the Prophet into daily guidance. Whenever he saw the Prophet, he would rush to be near him, even if just to hear a few words. One day, the Prophet taught him to maintain ties with those who cut them, to give to those who withhold, and to forgive those who wrong him. Uqba held those words like gems and made them a guide for his life. He teaches us that sometimes the most transformative wisdom comes in brief moments, spoken quietly. It is not about how much we hear, but how deeply we carry what we are taught. One sentence can shift a soul forever. 55. Abu Sufyan ibn al-Harith returned from a life of opposition into the arms of mercy. He had spent years opposing the Prophet, even writing poetry mocking him. But when the truth became undeniable, he humbled himself. He approached the Prophet on the day of conquest, unsure if he'd be accepted. The Prophet turned away at first, but when Abu Sufyan persisted with sincerity, he was welcomed and forgiven. His journey was not neat. It was full of tension and pride, but it ended with softness. He reminds us that even those who stand furthest from the light can walk toward it. And the doors of mercy are never truly closed to a heart willing to change. 56. Haram longed for a journey she would not see completed. The Prophet once told her she would be among those who crossed the sea in the path of Allah. She smiled, inspired by a future she could barely imagine. Years later, she joined the first Muslim naval expedition in her old age. She did not reach the destination, but she died along the way. Her grave lies by the shore, facing the water. She reminds us that intentions carry weight, even if the body does not complete the task. Dreams rooted in faith do not expire with time. They are honored in ways we may never see, but Allah never forgets. 57. Sa'd ibn Mu'adh's death shook the throne of Allah. He was a leader among his people, But his greatest honor came not from position, but from sacrifice. When he passed away from a wound sustained in battle, the prophet said the throne of Allah shook for him. His body was carried by angels, and his death marked a turning point in the community. His loyalty had been unwavering. His judgments had been just. He lived for the truth and died upholding it. He reminds us that sometimes a single life, lived with sincerity and courage, can earn the love of the heavens, and that every heartbeat in service of justice is remembered. 58. Al-Arqam opened his home to the first gatherings of Islam. When Islam was still new and vulnerable, he offered his home as a secret sanctuary. There, the Prophet taught, prayed, and built the first foundation of a believing community. Al-Arqam was young, but his decision carried weight far beyond his years. He understood that safety, space, and quiet support could be as critical as words and action. He reminds us that not all heroes stand in front. Some open their doors and hearts behind the scenes, shaping history in rooms few will ever see. His home became a cradle for revelation and a fortress for truth in its most fragile form. 59. Hani sheltered the Prophet in the moment of conquest. On the day Makkah was conquered, when tensions were high and revenge was feared, she granted protection to those who had sought refuge in her home. Some questioned her decision, but the Prophet supported her choice. He said, "We grant protection to whom you grant protection." Her courage was quiet, her mercy firm. She could have stood back in a moment of power, but she chose to intercede. She reminds us that standing for justice isn't always loud or visible. Sometimes it means opening your home, shielding the vulnerable, and using your voice to uphold peace when it matters most. 60. Zayd ibn Thabit memorized the Quran and then preserved it for all. He had been among the scribes of revelation, recording verses as they came. But after the Prophet's passing, Zayd was tasked with compiling the Quran in a single manuscript. He took the assignment with reverence and fear, knowing the weight of the task. He cross-checked every verse with written material and eyewitness memory, ensuring no error. His careful work preserved the Quran we hold today. He did not seek status or reward. He simply wanted to protect the words that had shaped his soul. He reminds us that true service to the deen often means precision, patience, and invisible effort. 61. Abu Musa al-Ash'ari recited the Quran with a voice that softened hearts. The Prophet once paused to listen as Abu Musa recited in the stillness of night, his voice rising with meaning and melody. When told, Abu Musa said, "Had I known you were listening, I would have beautified it more." But it needed no embellishment. His recitation was not about performance. It flowed from love, from understanding, from reverence. It moved hearts not just with sound, but with sincerity. He reminds us that the Quran is not merely read with the tongue. When it passes through a heart filled with light, it becomes a force that can reach where words alone cannot. 62. Al-Bara ibn Malik made dua with a heart full of certainty. He was small in stature, yet fierce in battle and firm in belief. In one critical moment, his dua turned the tide of a siege. The Prophet had once said, "If Al-Bara asks Allah for something, he will grant it." His prayers were not eloquent, but they were honest. He trusted that Allah heard him without doubt. His strength came from that inner assurance, not from any weapon he held. He reminds us that victory begins with trust. And when the heart is certain of its Lord, even the smallest hand can carry the weight of great change. 63. Juwayriya's remembrance turned a moment into a legacy. The Prophet passed by her one morning and returned hours later to find her still seated, repeating words of praise. He gently told her of a few phrases that, if said 3 times, would outweigh all that she had said. She smiled and listened. Her desire to remember Allah filled her time and her heart. She found contentment not in things but in dhikr, anchoring her day in the divine. She reminds us that time is not only counted in hours, but in what the soul does with them. A heart busy with remembrance is never truly idle. 64. Sa'd bin Abi Waqqas fought with courage and wept with tenderness. He was a commander, chosen to lead the army that would confront Persia. His sword was firm, but his heart was soft. He would cry in prayer, humbled before the one who gave him strength. He fasted, prayed, and lived with balance, never letting leadership pull him into arrogance. When people feared his power, he returned their accusations to Allah, and his innocence was preserved. He reminds us that strength is not harshness. Real leadership rests on humility, trust, and the willingness to stand alone, if it means staying honest. His victories were born not from strategy alone, but from submission. 65. Rufaida al-Aslamiyah treated wounds and restored hearts. She was not known for war or speeches, but for tending to the wounded with skill and compassion. On the battlefield, she created a space of healing, organizing care when chaos surrounded her. She asked permission from the Prophet to set up a tent near the mosque to serve the sick. Her touch was gentle, her hand steady. In a time when women were rarely acknowledged in public roles, she stood with purpose and service. She reminds us that healing is an act of worship, and those who care for the broken carry a light that strengthens the entire community. 66. Talha ibn Ubaidullah shielded the Prophet with his body. In the chaos of Uhud, when arrows flew and fear pressed in, Talha placed himself between danger and the Prophet. He suffered wound after wound, yet stood firm, refusing to step back. His hand was paralyzed, defending the one he loved. The Prophet later said, "Whoever wants to see a martyr walking on earth, let him look at Talha." His bravery came not from impulse, but from devotion. He reminds us that love is not just a feeling. It is action in the face of harm, sacrifice when it costs most, and loyalty that does not falter under fire. 67. Fatima bint Qais accepted a hard qadr with grace. Her husband passed away, and with him went her financial support. She was given no home to stay in by her in-laws. She asked the Prophet for guidance, and he supported her right to find her own way. She later narrated this event with clarity and strength, becoming a source of knowledge for others. Her voice helped shape discussions about fairness and responsibility. She did not complain, but sought understanding. She reminds us that when loss enters, faith does not demand silence. It calls for wisdom, for asking, and for embracing what Allah decrees with eyes open and head held high. 68. Abu Ayyub al-Ansari hosted the Prophet with joy and humility. When the Prophet first arrived in Medina, he stayed in Abu Ayyub's home. Abu Ayyub insisted that the Prophet take the upper floor, but the Prophet chose the lower, out of ease for visitors. Abu Ayyub could not sleep that night, feeling uneasy being above him. He and his wife carried their water on the edges of the vessel so none would drop below. His hospitality was not about comfort, but about reverence. He reminds us that honoring a guest is not only in food or words, but in the deep care we take to make them feel safe and loved. 69. Ayyash ibn Abi Rabi risked his safety to return for his mother. Though he had safely emigrated to Medina, his mother remained in Mecca. When she sent word of her suffering, he could not bear it. Against the warnings of others, he returned, only to be captured and imprisoned. His love for his mother had been real, but it had been used against him. When he was finally freed, he returned stronger, his faith deeper. He reminds us that love is powerful, but it must walk with wisdom. And even when we make difficult choices that lead to hardship, Allah can pull us from darkness and use our missteps to grow us. 70. Ibn Maktum called the people to prayer, though he could not see them. He was blind, yet the Prophet placed him as the muaddin in his absence, trusting his heart and timing. He stood at the edge of the mosque, raising his voice to the sky, inviting others to worship. Though he could not see the sun, he felt its warmth and knew its times. He was once the man to whom a verse was revealed when others dismissed him. His blindness never defined his limits. It sharpened his focus. He reminds us that ability is not about vision. It is about devotion, consistency, and rising each day to fulfill a trust, no matter what is seen. 71. Abu Dujana wore a red band on his head and walked into danger with calm pride. On the battlefield, he tied a red band around his head, a signal that he was ready to face whatever came. He did not shout or boast. He moved with the stillness of one who had already surrendered to his Lord. When given the Prophet's sword, he asked how it should be used. The Prophet said it must never strike in injustice. He honored that trust. His bravery was matched by his restraint. He reminds us that courage is not about anger or noise. It is about discipline, clarity, and stepping forward only when it is right to do so. 72. Abdullah ibn Rawaha recited poetry to strengthen the hearts of believers. He had a gift with words, and he used it not for applause but for purpose. In moments of fear or hesitation, he would recite verses that reminded the companions of paradise, of truth, of why they stood where they stood. His words did not stir emotions for their own sake. They called the soul to awaken. On the way to battle, he spoke softly to himself, saying the world is only a short stop. He reminds us that art, when guided by faith, becomes a tool of courage. A single line from a sincere heart can light fires in others. 73. Asma bint Abu Bakr refused to reveal the Prophet's location even under threat. When Quraysh discovered she had helped her father and the Prophet escape Makkah, they came demanding answers. One man slapped her so hard her earring flew off. She did not cry. She did not speak. Her silence was strength, her restraint, an act of trust. She had tied the provisions with the strings of her waistband, earning the name She of the Two Belts. She reminds us that loyalty is quiet and firm. It does not seek recognition. It endures pressure and pain with dignity, and holds to truth even when fear presses hard against the chest. 74. Zubair ibn al-Awwam defended the Prophet when others drew back. He was one of the first to draw his sword in defense of the Prophet. He did not wait for the tide to shift or the odds to improve. His love was immediate, and his action came from instinct rooted in faith. The Prophet called him his disciple and cousin. Zubair stood firm in every major trial, not for status, but because his soul could not rest while harm threatened the one he followed. He reminds us that loyalty is not a passive feeling. It is expressed in standing, moving, and guarding when others hesitate, even if it means standing alone. 75. Atiyah led women in washing the dead and taught others to do so. After battles and times of illness, when others turned away, she stepped forward. She prepared the bodies of the deceased with care and reverence, treating each one as a trust. She taught others how to wash and shroud, speaking with gentle authority. She even tended to the Prophet's own daughter. Her work was done in quiet spaces, far from public view, but it echoed in every corner of the community. She reminds us that dignity is not only preserved in life, but also in death. And those who honor the final rites carry a burden that angels themselves witness. 76. Al-Habab ibn al-Mundir advised the Prophet with clarity and humility. During the Battle of Badr, he asked whether the Prophet had chosen the camp by revelation or strategy. When told it was strategy, he offered a better location, and the Prophet accepted it. His question was respectful, his intent sincere. He did not hesitate to speak, nor did he speak to prove himself. He sought the best outcome for everyone. He reminds us that good counsel is not about pride. It is about timing, tone, and purpose. Even with the Prophet present, companions like Al-Habab knew that truth must be spoken when it benefits the whole. 77. Ubaidah ibn al-Harith stepped forward to begin the first duel at Badr. Before the battle lines clashed, 3 from each side met in single combat. Ubaidah was among the first to volunteer. He was struck and would later die from his wounds, but his heart never faltered. His final moments were spent smiling, knowing he had fulfilled his duty. He reminds us that legacy is not always measured in long life. Sometimes a single act of courage can define a name for eternity. And the first steps into danger, when taken with belief and trust, are honored in the heavens before the dust even settles on the battlefield. 78. Kunais ibn Hudafa died quietly, but was mourned deeply. He was not well known among the companions, but when he died, the Prophet himself led the prayer and buried him. His quiet devotion had not gone unnoticed. He had fought in battle, prayed among the first, and lived without seeking recognition. His story reminds us that not all companions were famous. Some lived their Islam in the margins, in the daily acts of faith that build character unseen. Yet their reward is with Allah, and their names are lifted by the lips of the Beloved. He reminds us that in sincerity, even obscurity becomes a path to honor. 79. al-Darda combined knowledge with worship and taught generations. She was known for her wisdom and memory, teaching both men and women in the Mosque of Damascus. She would fast regularly, pray in the quiet of night, and guide her students with gentle strength. Her knowledge was not just of texts, but of practice. She lived what she taught. When asked why she worked so hard, she said this world is a preparation. Her life reminds us that scholarship is not separate from worship. The most powerful teachers are those whose actions match their words, and whose hearts are as full of reverence as their minds are of insight. 80. Abu Huraira's mother embraced Islam through his tears and dua. He would invite her again and again, only to be met with rejection. One day she spoke harshly of the Prophet, and his heart broke. He went to the Prophet weeping, asking him to pray for her guidance. That evening she declared her faith. He returned, crying once more, but this time with joy. His persistence had not been in argument, but in love, in prayer, in patience. He reminds us that guidance cannot be forced. It is requested, waited for, and delivered in the timing of the most merciful. A son's heartbreak turned into a doorway to light. 81. Suhaib Rumi gave up everything he owned just to be with the Prophet. He had built a life in Makkah through sweat and trade, gaining wealth despite being a foreigner. But when he tried to leave for Medina, Quraysh confronted him. They told him he could not leave with both his body and his money. Without hesitation, he surrendered his wealth for the right to follow the Prophet. When he arrived, the Prophet greeted him saying, "Your transaction has profited you." Suhaib didn't lose that day. He traded what fades for what remains. He reminds us that migration for truth may cost much, but it always brings more than it takes away. 82. Abu Sufyan ibn al-Harith became beloved after years of hostility. He had been among those who fought against the Prophet, even mocking him with poetry. But when his heart turned, he did not ask for easy forgiveness. He traveled to Medina with humility, standing at the Prophet's door waiting to be accepted. At first he was met with silence, but he remained sincere and still. Eventually, the Prophet embraced him, and his transformation became complete. He reminds us that the door to return never truly closes. What matters is not where a person begins, but how earnestly they turn their heart when they realize they have been facing the wrong way. 83. Kulthum bint Uqba fled Makkah alone for the sake of her faith. She crossed the desert alone to escape persecution, seeking safety among the believers. When Quraysh tried to force her return, a verse was revealed affirming her choice. She was not sent back. She had left behind everything: family, comfort, security for the protection of her belief. Her courage was silent, personal, unseen by crowds, but witnessed by the one she worshipped. She reminds us that the hardest journeys are often internal, and the bravest among us are those who walk into uncertainty with nothing but trust in their Lord to carry them through the storm. 84. Sa'd ibn Abi Waqqas refused to disobey even when his mother threatened him. His mother swore she would stop eating and drinking until he abandoned Islam. She hoped guilt would break him, but he stood firm. He told her, "Even if you had 100 souls, I would not give up this truth." His heart ached, but his commitment never bent. He cared deeply, but he did not compromise. His firmness was not arrogance. It was loyalty to what was right. He reminds us that sometimes the test comes from those we love most, and holding firm in those moments requires both gentleness and a spine of unshakable clarity. 85. Lubaba bint al-Harith was among the first women to embrace Islam. She accepted the message even before it was safe to do so, standing with Khadija and others in those fragile early days. She was not a passive believer. She challenged Abu Lahab when he struck the Prophet and openly defended the truth. Her faith was immediate and fierce. She reminds us that the beginning of every movement needs those who are unafraid to be first. Her name may be less known, but her presence was part of the foundation. She teaches that faith requires courage not only in the battlefield, but in the living rooms and marketplaces where it all begins. 86. Abdullah ibn Amr wrote what the Prophet said so nothing would be forgotten. He had a pen and a heart eager to preserve. He asked the Prophet's permission to write everything he heard, fearing he might forget. With that blessing, he recorded what many only carried in memory. His journals became sources for later generations, holding not just rulings but stories, advice, and gentle reminders. He reminds us that preserving truth is an act of love. When we write to protect wisdom, we serve not just ourselves but those we may never meet. His ink was quiet, but it continues to echo in every page of hadith studied around the world. 87. Shifa bint Abdullah was trusted to educate and heal. She was skilled in medicine and literacy, and the Prophet recognized her gifts. He encouraged her to teach others, and even entrusted her with a role in the market to help oversee fairness. Her presence was dignified and impactful, not because she sought power, but because she carried trust well. She reminds us that faith does not restrict women from leadership or knowledge. It honors them when they use their talents in service to the community. Her life was a blend of care and command, and her footsteps show that the path of influence can be walked with grace. 88. Amr ibn al-Jamu overcame his physical limitations to join the battlefield. He walked with a limp, and his sons begged him to stay behind, but he pleaded to be allowed to strive for martyrdom. The Prophet permitted him, and he fought at Uhud until he fell in battle. His body may have been limited, but his spirit surged beyond it. He was carried not by strength but by yearning. He reminds us that excuses are often illusions. What matters is not how much the body can do, but how much the heart wants to meet its Lord with proof of love etched in effort. 89. Ubay ibn Ka'b was named by the Prophet as master of the Quran. The Prophet once told his companions to learn Quran from 4 people, and Ubay's name was among them. His recitation, understanding, and love for the book became a lantern for others. He would cry while reading, his voice cracking not from effort but from emotion. He lived through the verses, not above them. He reminds us that being close to the Quran is not a title but a responsibility. It is not memorization alone that elevates. It is the way the verses settle into our choices, soften our speech, and lift our gaze from the world toward the hereafter. 90. Salat supported the Prophet with whatever she had. She did not fight in battles, but she provided water, bandages, and comfort. She tended to the wounded, whispered words of strength, and moved between the rows of the believers with compassion. She did not need a sword to serve. Her presence was a kind of armor, lifting spirits in the moments when fear crept in. She reminds us that victory is not won only by those at the front lines. Every cloth soaked in water, every word of reassurance, every unseen act of kindness contributes to the rising of a community built on faith and mutual care. 91. Ka'b ibn Malik told the truth even when it hurt. When he missed the expedition of Tabuk without excuse, Ka'b could have lied as others did, but he stood before the Prophet and told the truth. His honesty cost him 40 days of social boycott, days filled with sorrow and silence. Yet he held firm, knowing falsehood would only bury him deeper. At last, Allah revealed his forgiveness in the Quran. Ka'b's face lit with joy, and his heart became even stronger. He reminds us that truth is not always easy or comfortable, but when chosen with sincerity, it becomes a door to divine mercy that no lie can open. 92. Abdullah ibn Abbas stood behind the Prophet as a child and listened with longing. He was only a boy, yet the Prophet once drew him close and made dua that he be granted deep understanding of religion. That prayer became the soil from which one of Islam's greatest scholars grew. He would follow the elders, listen quietly, ask respectfully, and reflect deeply. He reminds us that greatness often begins in childhood, not with fame or talent, but with closeness to the right example. The seeds of knowledge take root in hearts that are eager, humble, and patient, and when watered by sincere intention, they bloom for generations beyond their own. 93. Al-Nu'ayman brought laughter to the Prophet's life without crossing the line. He was known among the companions for his humor and light-hearted mischief. Once, he gifted something to the Prophet without owning it. then promised to pay the seller. When discovered, everyone laughed, including the prophet. But even in jest, Nu'ayman never disrespected or disobeyed. His playfulness brought joy without harm. He reminds us that Islam makes room for smiles, for warmth, for humor that lifts the soul rather than lowering the tone. Joy has a place in the life of the believer when it is rooted in love and guided by adab. 94. Abu Lubaba tied himself to a pillar in repentance. He had revealed sensitive information in a moment of regret and immediately felt remorse. Without being told, he tied himself to a pillar of the mosque and refused to be released until forgiveness came. Days passed. The prophet waited until revelation confirmed that he was forgiven, then personally untied him. His repentance was not about show. It was his way of holding himself accountable. He reminds us that when a heart is sincere, it does not wait to be corrected. It takes the first step, even if it means binding itself until it feels whole again. 95. Sharik risked her life by hosting new Muslims in secret. In the harsh days of Makkah, she invited people into her home to teach them the basics of Islam. She did it quietly, knowing the danger. When caught, she was dragged through the desert, denied food and water, and left in the heat for days. She survived through her unshakable reliance on Allah. She reminds us that da'wah is not always a speech or a pamphlet. Sometimes it's a quiet act of care, a whispered lesson, a hidden sacrifice. And even when no one sees, the one who writes every deed knows who stood firm for his sake. 96. Salman al-Farsi reminded the Prophet of balance in times of zeal. When one companion vowed to fast daily, another to avoid marriage, and a third to pray the entire night, the Prophet corrected them gently. But it was Salman who first advised one of them to care for his body, rest, and his family. He said, "Your Lord has a right over you, and so does yourself." The Prophet approved of his wisdom. He reminds us that faith is not about burning ourselves out. It's about balance, consistency, and mercy toward ourselves. True devotion is not found in extremes, but in the quiet discipline of a life anchored in steadiness. 97. Abu Salama died with the words of hope on his lips. When he passed away, he said, "O Allah, give me something better than what I leave behind." His wife, Salama, later married the Prophet himself. That final dua became her comfort and a doorway to a life filled with new blessings. He reminds us that even in death, the words we speak matter. A hopeful heart at the end of its journey still plants seeds that bloom after it is gone. Faith does not stop at the grave. It echoes through the lives of those we love and the prayers we leave behind. 98. Julaybib was small and overlooked, but chosen by the Prophet himself. People avoided him because of his appearance, but the Prophet saw his worth and arranged for him to marry a woman of great dignity. When he fell in battle, the Prophet searched until he found his body and cradled him, saying, "He is from me, and I am from him." He was buried with that honor. Julaybib reminds us that beauty is not in faces or forms, but in hearts that are sincere. A life of obscurity in the eyes of people can be a life of immense value in the eyes of the one who created them. 99. Al-Miqdam ibn Madikarib carried himself with honor and silence. He did not speak unless it added meaning, and when he did, his words were weighty with wisdom. He observed the Prophet closely and preserved his sayings and practices with careful attention. In moments of conflict, he remained composed. In times of temptation, he stepped back. He reminds us that strength is not only in action, but in restraint. Sometimes the one who watches, listens, and waits before speaking becomes the voice others need when confusion fills the air. His legacy was not carved in public displays, but in the quiet discipline of living what he had learned. 100. The Prophet's companions wept when revelation stopped. When the Prophet passed away and the Quran was complete, there were no more verses descending from the sky. The companions wept, not only for the loss of their beloved guide, but because the door to direct speech from heaven had closed. Yet they carried that message forward, preserved it with tears and effort, and built a civilization on its foundation. Their sorrow turned into service, their love turned into action. They remind us that revelation may have ended, but the path is still open. What they built was not for their time alone. It was left as a light for all who follow. The lives of the Sahabah were not shaped by ease or perfection, but by sincerity, struggle, and unwavering love for the truth. Each story, whether loud with bravery or quiet with patience, offers a glimpse into what it means to live for something greater than the self. They were merchants, warriors, mothers, scholars, servants, and seekers united not by background, but by purpose. Their choices were rooted in trust, their sacrifices born from love, and their legacy carried by hearts that refused to break even in the darkest moments. They did not just follow the Prophet, they carried his light forward, and in doing so, they lit the way for us. These 100 lessons are more than history. They are mirrors, calling us to ask how we walk, what we stand for, and where our hearts are anchored. The path remains. It waits for those willing to follow with sincerity and courage,